Hi, everyone. We're going to be moving on to lesson 10 today. Okay, and we're going to be focusing on the author's message. Our vocabulary word today is positive, and that means constructive, optimistic, or confident. So think about that word positive today during our lesson because it really has to do with the author's message. We've been learning that good readers focus on identifying the important events as they read. So we're still focusing just in the introduction, and we created this important list during lesson 9. And that's going to help us identify the author's message by looking at these important events. So let's just review the important events list quickly, and then we'll move on. So gold was discovered on the Klondike River in 1896. Then thousands of people traveled to the Yukon Territory in search of gold. To get to the gold fields, pioneers had to first travel by ship, then hike over mountains, and finally traveled by riverboat. Many people gave up before reaching their destination. Those who reached the gold fields were challenged by harsh seasons, so really, really hot summers and really, really cold winters. In the boom towns, right, those are those towns that just popped up, the people built businesses, sidewalks, and homes once they were there. So today I'm going to teach you that good readers look for the author's message in any piece of writing. So that could be once you finish a text, or it could be from a section of a text. So we're looking for the author's message just in the introduction today. Today we're going to be thinking about the author's message as we read the last paragraphs of the introduction. And I know in my class we've talked about author's message, and I'm sure in Miss Posk's class and Miss Sosa's class, you guys have talked about the author's message too. But if you forget, right here, this is what's going to tell us what the author's message is. It's the big idea, okay? It's what the author wants you to take away from your reading. And understanding the message helps you understand the story. Because if you know what's supposed to be important in the text, as you're reading, you can keep that in mind. So it's the big idea of the text. So we're focusing on the introduction. And the introduction of The Children in the Gold Rush is an overview of the topic of the Klondike Gold Rush, right? So we know that it's an overview about what's going to be within this entire anthology. In the introduction, the authors tell us what this book is going to be about, and they communicate their message. Not every book has an introduction. Most anthologies do. But if it doesn't have an introduction, you can still find the author's message by looking at the important events as you read the entire text. So we're going to finish reading the introduction today. And as we read the introduction, we're going to identify the author's message. So as I'm reading, I want you to look at these talking stems here and keep these in mind. So you're going to be thinking about, you're going to think about this in your head. You can use the stem to help you. When the book said blank, I was thinking this was an important event because blank, and this makes me think blank. This part right here where it says this makes me think, that's talking about the author's message. So this makes you think what about the author's message, okay? So we left off we read up to paragraph 7. So I'm going to read paragraph 8, and we're going to finish off the introduction, okay? So this is what the page looks like. Okay. If the children were fortunate enough to have a school, they often had no reading or arithmetic books. Instead, they might read pages from torn magazines and use chalk slates to do their figures. White children went to school side by side with the native children, sometimes learning their traditional language. For some children, there was no school at all, so they had their lessons at home. Native or immigrant, they learned the value of education, and a surprising number later attended college. So even though it wasn't a formal school, they made do with what they had, kind of like we're doing right now. Although everyone who searched for gold hoped to get rich, few actually did. Fathers and mothers spent long hours working. Many children worked as well, baking bread, selling newspapers, sewing, or picking berries to sell. Learning to work hard at a very young age may have been their best lesson of all. Many children overcame difficult family circumstances. Separation and divorce were common in the confusing gold rush world of travel, change, and greed. So separation is if people who are not married separate, but there was no legal document saying they're married. But it also, when they're saying separation or divorce, if people are married and they break apart, but they never do the paperwork to say that the divorce, that's what that means. And you can imagine why there was so much separation and divorce, because families were being pulled apart, and it was a confusing time. Brave and full of adventure, Gold Rush kids quickly learned how to adapt and make the most of their new situations, and perhaps infected by the internal optimism of gold seekers, they learned to be positive, even during times of misfortune. Some Gold Rush kids stayed only a few short years, but they never forgot their experiences. Others grew up to work at steady jobs and raised their own children in Alaska that had changed dramatically since their childhood. The children featured in this book represent the variety of adventures that Gold Rush kids experienced 100 years ago. Gold Rush kids were entertainers like Crystal and Monty Snow, native children of prospectors like Cherosky sisters, short-time visitors joining their papas like the Anderson children, and a military brat like Robert Farnsworth. Some children of mixed marriages like the Mayo twins, a little girl in search of her papa like Claudie Nelson, a child of divorce like Cleo Cassidy, and a young entrepreneur more successful than his father, like Donald McDonald. An entrepreneur is someone who creates their own business or product and makes money that way. So we're going to hear about Donald McDonald, who was an entrepreneur. 100 years later, we know about these remarkable children because of the records they left. Some wrote about their adventures in books or magazines. Others left behind their unpublished diaries and poems. Still others passed on their rich memories to their descendants who have shared them with us. So this is all based off of evidence that they found, published or not published. So let's look at some of the evidence that points us to the author's message that we just read there. Some of the quotes that stuck out to me for important events that led to the author's message was on page 8 when it said, in the summertime, they played outdoors all night because the sun never set. So they played all night because they were working all day. So that I felt like was important. Also on page 8 in the next paragraph, it said, learning to work hard at a very young age may have been their best lesson of all. So even students who didn't go, or children who didn't go to school and become students, they learned how to work hard, which was the most important lesson of all. And lastly, this was on page 9. They learned to be positive even during times of misfortune. So what could the author's message be? Think about our vocabulary word from the beginning. Think about the important events list. And think about those 3 quotes. What could it be? I was thinking that the author's message is that the children of the Gold Rush learned to be positive even during hard times. So today and every day you read, I want you to keep track of important events as you read and identify the author's message from the introduction. I also added or after reading a text because not every text does have an introduction, and not every introduction reveals the author's message. It depends on how extensive it is. Okay. For your comment today, I want you to comment with what you found to be the most surprising from this lesson today. What's something that really surprised you that you didn't think the children of the Gold Rush maybe had to face? I'll see you guys soon. Bye.